Welcome back to another episode of Make It to Midnight. This is episode 8. Last episode was about Simon Sinek's 5 Rules to Life. This one is about Katharine Graham. Katharine Graham was in charge of the Washington Post. Her family was in charge of the Washington Post for a long time. Ultimately, she stopped working with them in the 90s, but her story and what she did for that company and what she overcame to do it. Remember, she took over in the 60s, 70s, a time when women were being oppressed majorly in the workplace. She ends up becoming the first ever female CEO of a Fortune 500 company in the history of America. And what it took for that company to become a Fortune 500 company, this one will blow your mind because it blew my mind. And a lot of the stuff came from Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Go check that book out. And also a documentary just dropped about Katharine Graham. Warren Buffett is one of the main interviewees. You'll see why once we get into this episode. But before we get into Katharine Graham's story of resilience, we got to talk about our quote of the day. I'm going to give you multiple quotes of the day because this one is all from our guy, Bill Walsh, legendary NFL head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. But when he came to the 49ers, it was not all of the rings and the bling that you see in that franchise now, hanging up all the banners. He took over a bad situation and he dropped some gems to these players to create this culture, to create a championship culture. I'm going to give you 3 of his quotes. 3 quotes from Bill Walsh to help you through your week, through your day, whatever you need them for, you use them for. So here they are. But before I get into Bill Walsh's quotes, actually, I got to give you a little bit of background on him. And this shows he was such a process-oriented coach. He was never focused on the result as much as he was the process and how his team was carrying themselves inside the facility each and every day. When Bill Walsh got to the 49ers, his first record, 2-14. Think about that today. If a coach goes 2-14 in college football, NFL football, they're probably going to get fired or they're going to be on the hot seat. But this was a different time, different era, and maybe this is a note to all the athletic directors out there thinking about firing their coach after one bad year. They went 2-14. Then they go 6-10. So a little bit of improvement. The building is starting to get a little bit more culture to it. They're starting to buy into what Bill Walsh is preaching. And then in his 3rd year, all it took him was 3 years, truly 2 full seasons of coaching. They won a Super Bowl. They go 13-3. Now, if you were to rewind and tell that 2-14 team, hey guys, hang on for 2 seasons, we're winning the Super Bowl, I bet you after that first year, the guys weren't buying it. The second year, as they start to buy into Coach Bill Walsh and all of his great teachings and everything, I bet they started to see the vision a little bit more. And some of the things Bill Walsh was telling that team were these 3 quotes. Quote number 1 from Bill Walsh: concentrate on what will produce results rather than results. Process over results. That's quote number 1. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You can't be focused on just winning the game, right? You have to be focused on what it takes to win the game. You have to be focused on what it takes to win your day. What does that look like in your day? If you're focusing on what will produce the results, the things that could produce your results, getting up at the time you said you're going to get up. Instead of getting up at 9, getting up at 8. Not eating after 9 p.m. Signing that contract with yourself. Concentrating on that process instead of not concentrate getting a 6-pack. Concentrate on doing the things that it's going to take to get that 6-pack, to get you living your optimal life. Process over prize all day long. And if you buy into that process, at some point you will reach your prize. The prize might look different than you thought, but you will still get there if you trust the process, if you commit yourself to the process. Let's get to quote number 2. This one piggybacks kind of off quote number 1, but it goes like this: champions behave like champions before they become champions. You see it all the time. There's a little saying out there, the fake it till you make it. Part of that is very true. But what does it mean to behave like a champion? It's just like this. It's just like the quote that we said before. When you concentrate on the process over the results. What does a champion do? He shows up every day. He has enthusiasm. He helps out others. He tries to improve himself every day. He never looks down on anybody. He's kind to everybody. He tries to learn from everybody. Every single day he attacks it with the mindset of, how can I improve myself to then improve my team? How can my team improve me? How can we all lift each other up? That is the championship mindset. And in order to become a champion, you have to act like that each and every day. And then you'll become a champion. Now, our last one from Coach Bill Walsh. If your why is strong enough, you'll figure out how. The reason I love this one is because it reminds me of something we talked about in a previous episode. They're saying if your why is strong enough, you'll figure out how. This is like, I believe it was Eleanor Roosevelt says, it's not about finding your passion, it's about finding your purpose. There's more weight that's in your purpose than there is your passion. The passion is a little bit more selfish. The purpose usually tends to affect other people around you off of it, and your purpose is what keeps you committed to that goal, to your dreams, to your passion. Your purpose is what keeps you committed to your passion. That might have been my first ever homemade quote, but I think I kind of like it. Maybe when I listen to it back, might have to draw something up. But I love that, man, because for a while I was a passion-driven person. Man, I'm passionate about sports. I'm passionate about this. But what was the purpose of it all? Ultimately, I found out my purpose, hopefully, is to inspire, impact other people in a positive way that helps them believe themselves, but more importantly, shows them that they have an important enough story that they should share with others, because they can also impact people way more than they think they can. And that ultimately is what I feel my purpose is, to inspire others. And Bill Walsh was one of the best examples of that. He created multiple championships. He created champions through the process. And if you owe the process everything, the process owes you nothing. But I promise, if you give it all, you're going to get something in return, because you will come out of the other side of it as a new man, regardless if it's a championship or not. You will have all of these traits, all of these skills, the mental fortitude to become a champion. And that's what it's all about, man. Be a champion each and every day. Now, let's go ahead and get into Katharine Graham's story. So Katharine Graham, as I said, she comes from the Mayer family, and her father, Eugene Mayer, he bought the Washington Post back in 1933. Obviously, we know late 20s, early 30s was the Great Depression. So business was not good. The paper was important, but they were losing money. So Eugene Mayer, he buys it. Katharine was the only one of her siblings that had any kind of interest in it. But remember, this was the 30s when he bought it. So think 30s, 40s, 50s. Think about women's roles in the U.S. Not really a job she's going to be showing up and interning with dad at, because it's dad and 60 other guys working at the Washington Post. And unfortunately for Katharine Graham, she did not have any Bill Walsh quotes to go off of, because this one I think could have helped her out. Almost always your road to victory goes through a place called failure. Katharine Graham experienced a failure, but she never wavered. And what you are about to hear, you will question how in the world did she never waver? And ultimately, it's because she was able to suppress her ego and keep the purpose above everything else. So this is how it all went down. When Eugene Mayer was ready to leave the company, his daughter Katharine was married to a guy named Phil Graham, who was a savvy businessman, successful. He understood how to make businesses succeed. So naturally, Eugene passes. Katharine gets the ownership of the Washington Post. They stick Phil in charge. Now, Phil is doing okay at first, but then everything kind of starts to weigh on him, right? He starts drinking more. He starts getting into the drug world. He has some affairs, and ultimately he has a mental episode where Katharine is actually trying to nurse him back to health, back to his right state of mind, which already says a lot about her. But unfortunately, Phil ended up committing suicide and leaving the Washington Post to her. So think she's got to deal with, she's now a widow, and I know her and her husband, obviously he had his issues, there was the affairs and everything, but at the end of the day, she loved that person. Think about how hard it is getting back into life after losing somebody you love, especially when it happens in the room next to you. I read in this book that she was actually taking a nap in the room, maybe on the same floor, and he got a shotgun and he killed himself. So she already has to deal with that kind of disaster, tragedy. But she decides, she gains full control of the Washington Post, and everyone is kind of trying to convince her, right? They're saying, hey, look, just let us take care of it, collect your dividend check, and everything's good. Now, Katharine Graham, she grew up rich. She grew up going to the best school. She's a smart girl, but she never really had to work. And remember, again, I keep hitting on this time period. It's way different than now. But also remember, she loved the Washington Post. She was passionate about it. She was the only one of her siblings that was passionate about it. So she says, you know what? I'm going headfirst into this thing, and I'm going to make sure this paper succeeds. Now, it did anything but succeed for the first almost 20 years of her run as the owner. She took it over at age 46. At age 46, she becomes the CEO of a company that has over 1,000 employees. The whole entire board is full of males that definitely do not want her in there shaking things up, because the Washington Post was going to go public here soon. And so they didn't want to ruin stock prices. They all wanted to make their money, and they just did not want her to put her hands in it. And then something crazy happens for Katharine Graham, and this is what really puts her and the Washington Post on the map. They get some documents from an anonymous source about some things going on in the White House. These things later, I don't think I'm actually going to tell you yet what these papers were, but it was a decision she had to make. Do I release these papers that could incriminate the White House, incriminate the most powerful man in the free world, or do I just keep it to myself? We sell and we take the safe route. Everybody gets paid. She loves journalism. She decides, you know what? I'm gonna roll this out. Now, before she rolls it out, she knows how the White House feels about her. She knows that they know she has these papers that could hurt them. And so President Richard Nixon and his attorney general start to come at Katharine's throat. And it is not good. You have the president of the United States making sure the Washington Post, your media outlet, is not going to succeed. Talk about stacking the odds against somebody. I don't know how she even had the belief to think, all right, we're still going to come out on the other side of this successfully, even though the most powerful place in the United States is after us and wants to shut us down. So this is all in the early to mid 1970s. Now, naturally, the president starts talking badly about the Washington Post. That price plummets. The stock market price plummets. They're thinking, oh my gosh, what have we done? Katharine Graham is ruining this. There's a young investor out there that's buying up a ton of these shares for cheap, and the other people on the board are starting to kind of freak out, because now this person who's buying them up could be taking full power over this company if they get majority of the shares. It's a whole debacle. Now, as all these shares are getting bought up, it gets even worse, because then there's a strike. There's the printers union goes on a strike. And so, they stop going into work, and ultimately some of the equipment and technology gets destroyed within the Washington Post to where they're not able to print anymore, which is costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars per week. Think about that, $100,000 per week back in the 1970s. This is about as bad as you can get. And now the time for a decision comes about what we should do with these papers. Do we release them? Do we go for it? Do we go against what everybody is saying? Katharine Graham asks everybody around her, hey, do you guys think I should do this? Is it smart for the company? They say no. This is only going to pour gasoline on this fire that is the burning Washington Post. But something about it made her want to continue to go through with posting these papers. Before I tell you what these papers are, you can probably guess. The person that had bought all of these shares when it was very cheap was the man that we all know now, Warren Buffett, billionaire, one of the smartest entrepreneurs, businessmen in U.S. history. He was a young man at the time. He knew the Washington Post was a valuable company, and he saw how cheap it was selling for. He said, you know what? This is a smart investment, which we all know now that it was. But Katharine Graham and him also became friends. And Warren Buffett, he's in her documentary. He's answering all the questions. He has all the praise in the world for her. And if you know anything about Warren Buffett, he doesn't do many interviews, but he did a full documentary singing the praises of Katharine Graham, and for good reason. But he was able to kind of coach her up through the business, get the Washington Post a little bit back on track. And then Katharine Graham, this is when she decides to release the papers. These papers end up being the Pentagon Papers and leading to Watergate and the demise of Richard Nixon. The most important papers probably in U.S. journalism history. It saved so many journalists. It made sure they always had a voice, even when the White House was coming down their necks. She stood up to them. Katharine Graham stood up to them. The lady who she was never running a company before she took over the Washington Post at age 46 years old. This was her first shot at it. She went through 10 to 20 years of just straight fire. But what gets made, what gets forged in a fire? A weapon. Katharine Graham became a weapon in business in this country, and she shaped journalism for the many years to come. And if you're curious about just how good of an investment she made on herself, I left this detail out as well. Yes, Warren Buffett was buying up all the shares, and which led her to come to a point of like, okay, I need to maintain control of this company. So that means I need to take a lot of our money and put it back into this company, which at the time, nobody was doing it. Now a lot of guys will do it, but it will fail because it's people that are too addicted to their ego, to this dream, to this product they made, but they're addicted to it for the wrong reasons. They're addicted to it because they know it will feed their ego. It's for them. It doesn't have anything to do with the product and what the product can do for other people. It has everything to do with what they think other people will think about them if their company does succeed, if their product does succeed. They want that glory, they want that praise, they want that credit, and ultimately, since those are the things they're driven by, they receive none of it and they fail. Not Katharine Graham. She loved the Washington Post. She didn't like the fame of it. She didn't like any of those other extra things that came along with it. She loved the journalism and she loved running this company, and she bet on herself. She poured in company money. She poured in her money to buy up majority shares and say, you know what? The stock market is wrong about me. I'm right about me. And I'm going to show you because I know this process, and I know if I stay true to this process, I will get to that reward. And this is what that reward looked like. She bought the stock in the company to keep, some ownership of it, keep majority ownership of it during her time as CEO. She bought that for around $20 per share. 10 years later, only 10 years, that went from $20 to $300 per share. Remember, first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company in American history, and it's because of this betting on yourself. If you bet on yourself with the right intentions and the minimum amount of ego, you got a whole lot better chance of succeeding. And that pretty much is the short synopsis of Katharine Graham's business journey with the Washington Post. Now, admittedly, I don't know much about her personal life, how she was, with people. Did people enjoy working for her? I'd imagine they probably did. If her shares went from $20 to $300 per share in a decade, she probably made a lot of people rich. But I also don't think you can be a good leader in this type of setting if you don't have a good heart at the core of you. But I did my best to regurgitate the info I learned about Katharine Graham. I was very, very inspired by this story when I read it. Again, that's An Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Y'all should definitely read it. And I got some of the info from her documentary as well. But Katharine Graham, may she rest in peace. Thank you for inspiring me to make this episode. Thank you for inspiring me to keep my ego minimum. And also thank you for inspiring us to bet on yourself, because if you are truly driven by your purpose, then you will learn a lot about yourself in the best way, and you will grow into who you want to become, who you're striving to be. So shout out to Katharine Graham. Shout out to you guys for listening and sticking with me as we keep stacking these episodes, as I keep trying to improve on these podcasts. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I'm enjoying doing it, and I'm going to try to get more consistent for you guys. So as always, thank you. And also, as always, make it to midnight. Keep making it to midnight and keep trying to spread some joy, positivity, and inspiration to those in your lives. I promise you can make a bigger impact than you think. Thanks for listening. Make it to midnight.